On today's episode of the NASM CPT Podcast, with me, Rick Richey, I explore the quadriceps muscles. I go through the quadriceps muscles, each one of them, and I talk about the origin and the insertion, or the proximal and distal attachment, discuss joint actions, and then researchers may have just identified a new muscle in the thigh, perchance a fifth quadricep muscle. Anyway, listen to figure it out. All right, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, and share with your fitness friends and family, and leave a 5-star review. Now, here's the episode, the overview of the quad muscles.
You're listening to the NASM CPT Podcast with Rick Richey, winner of the Sharecare Emmy Award for social storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM CPT Podcast. My name is Rick Richey, and today I got a question from somebody. She told me that she had passed her NASM CPT, holla, and she has now gone on to do her stretching certification and also her corrective exercise. And so in the process, she says, my question to you, can you provide content on muscle origin and insertions with a focus on corrective exercise specialist coursework? I would love to hear you talk about them. Jill W. So, Jill, yes, I can. And so for the first muscle, I want to talk about the quadriceps. We're talking about the quadriceps because it's a big old muscle group. And within the muscle group of the quadriceps, there are, first of all, let's get the name right. So we'll say quads. All right, so my quads, my quad musculature. And when we look at it, the quadriceps also has another word after it. It's the quadriceps femoris or femoris. And that just means that the quad's located on the femur. So we know that there are 4 muscles in the quadriceps because quad means 4 and ceps means, and nobody knows what that means. And they'll say that there are 4 muscles or there are 4 heads, but nobody knows what it means. And I'm here to tell you that ceps means heads. So 4 heads of a muscle. There is the rectus femoris, there's the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and vastus intermedius. And in a moment, I'm going to talk briefly about a 5th muscle in the quadriceps. And no, it is not the vastus medialis obliquus, which sometimes is considered the 5th one. We've found a 5th quad. What does that mean for naming purposes? I don't know, but I do want to talk about it and tell you that after centuries, they found another muscle. So let's talk about this for a little bit. You won't have to know that for the CES. Don't worry about that. Pump the brakes, Jill. Don't get scared. We're just going to go in a little easy here. So we got the 4 muscles. So let's go through it. 3 are the vasti muscles or the vastus muscles. Vastus medialis, which let's talk about the etymology here. So vastus means vast. It means large. These are large muscles. So vastus medialis, the one on the medial side, vastus lateralis, the quadricep on the lateral side, vastus intermedius, the large or the vast muscle of the quadricep in the middle of the lateral and the medial. But then there's a muscle that comes in from the outside. It is an outsider that comes in and wrecks everything. And that is the rectus femoris or the rectus femoris. And let's talk about that. Let's break that down etymologically. I think we know femoris for femur, but then rectus, what does that mean? Because we hear that with some muscles, rectus femoris, rectus abdominis. So we have this word rectus that is included within the context of our understanding of anatomy. What does it mean? It just means straight. So it's a muscle. You think about your rectus abdominis. They go straight up and down. The rectus femoris goes straight up and down, except for the Q angle, which we're not going to talk about because that is going to blow everything up. So we've got now these 4 muscles, and they all cross the knee. We know they cross the knee. So Let's talk about it. If they all cross the knee, then we know that they work together to extend the knee joint. But remember, one of them comes in from outside and wrecks everything. So which muscle comes in from outside and what joint does it cross to come in from outside? So the rectus femoris crosses the knee, yes, but it also crosses the hip joint. It crosses the hip joint on the front of the leg. And so as it works with the other quadriceps, it can extend the knee, but it also is a hip flexor. It's a hip flexor in addition to a knee extender. So if you think about it, just sitting, standing, wherever you are right now, unless you're driving, that's dangerous. So you can just take your leg in a standing or seated position and just bend your knee up towards your chest, and then straighten your leg out. So you're hip flexed, and then you're going to go knee extension. Or you can just keep your leg down, keep it completely straight, lock the knee out, and then lift the straight leg up as high as you can lift it up. And you're going to feel that muscle right in the middle of the thigh, Charlie horse. It's going to start cramping on you. So in order to stretch our quads, what do? Well, we generally will pull our foot towards our butt, and then we extend the hip. Well, that does the opposite of what the two joint actions are of the rectus femoris. It is knee flexion, which the only joint action the other muscles can do is knee extension, right? So when you knee flex, all of those muscles get stretched to their max. But when you extend the hip, then the rectus femoris starts to get stretched. So I can take my knee just sitting here, and I can pull it up to my chest. And if I bend my knee all the way, that's the most stretch. Even if my hip is flexed and I pull my knee to my chest, and then I pull my heel to my backside like I'm hugging my leg, that is a stretch for the vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, vastus lateralis, but it's not a stretch for the rectus femoris. Why? Because we're shortening it from the hip. But if I keep my heel pulled towards my butt, and now I let my knee go into extension away from where I pulled it to my chest, and I go all the way back, and I pull it towards my heel to my backside with my knee pointing down to the floor, for instance, while I'm upright, that's going to stretch my quad, because that's the opposite of the joint actions that the rectus femoris does. Sometimes when you're training clients and you have them do bridges, and it's good, really good for glute activation, posterior chain activation, and you say, where do you feel it? Do you feel that more in your hamstrings? Do you feel that more in your glutes? Do you feel it more in your low back? And they go, no, I feel it here. And they pat the front of their thighs. Why do they feel it there? Because the bridge is a stretched position for the rectus femoris, for the quads, because the knees are flexed and the hips are extended. So let's talk a little bit about the rectus fem. We're going to go origin insertion because that's a question that was asked. So let's get to it. I've got, first of all, I want to talk about, there are two tendons, and it doesn't seem like it should be. It's just a naming thing. So there are tendons around the knee. So if you think about the quads go over the kneecap, or actually the kneecap kind of grows inside of the tendon. And so the tendon above the patella is called the quadriceps tendon. The tendon below the patella that attaches into the greater trochanter, the tubercle, that's going to be the patellar tendon. So above the patella, where the quads are the quadriceps tendons, and then the quadriceps tendon below the patella is the patellar tendon. And that's important for a couple of reasons, because there are different tendinopathies that take place. So there's tendinopathies that can take place below the patella and above the patella, and that gives us better distinction to help understand where there might be some type of pathology or some type of stress. All right, so here we go. We're going to go look at origin insertion, right? So the rectus femoris, it crosses the hip joint, crosses the knee joint. The origin, or the proximal attachment, is the anterior inferior iliac spine. Now, some of us are less familiar with the AIIS and more familiar with the ASIS. And why? The anterior superior iliac spine are those two bony notches on the pelvis that you can feel if you go down there. And sometimes we'll measure that and see if you're in alignment. Look at the alignment of your pelvis, and we put our little thumbkins on the ASISs to see what alignment is there. Well, the AIIS, the anterior inferior iliac spine, is a protuberance below, inferior to the ASIS, because it is inferior iliac spine. And there's a notch there that the patellar, that the rectus femoris tendon attaches to. And then it also goes into the supraacetabular groove. So there's just a little groove just above where the acetabulum is of the ilium. So for the most part, and for NASM, we're going to look more at the AIIS, and that's going to be the proximal attachment, or also known as the origin. Now, the insertion, or the distal attachment, is the tibial tuberosity. So if you go down to your tibia, so just go hands right over the knees, and you get to the tibia, the large bone in the lower leg, and you feel that bony protuberance. That bony protuberance is a tuberosity. And that is where the quadriceps attaches into. And I also want you to think about this. I've talked about this on the show before, but if you take your hands and you go across the knees and you feel your kneecap, you feel that it feels just basically like there's skin, and then there's my patella. But the quadriceps, actually, the tendon goes over the top of that patella. It's over the top of it. And so all of the tension, that just shows how strong tendons are, is that you've got a very long lever in your femur and a very long lever in your lower leg or your tibia. And so when you do things like knee extensions, you've got this powerful extension that takes place. And all it does is the femur, the quads just go about an inch, maybe as much as 2 inches down on your tibia. So to extend your tibia by holding on to the most proximal portion of the tibia, you think about that. That's like taking a barbell and only holding on to the end of the barrel and trying to lift the barbell. It just doesn't make any sense how strong these muscles actually are. So when you see things like, oh, they're doing leg extensions with 50 pounds, just know there is a mathematical equation that we can put together and find out the how far into the tendon attaches to the tibia, how long the tibia is, and then how much you're lifting. And that will tell you how much actual muscle contraction force is taking place. And it's hundreds and hundreds of pounds. So that is a lot of work that goes on there. So I've got this thin quadricep tendon that goes over the patella, and then after it passes the patella, probably even while it's on it, would be considered the patellar tendon. And it attaches into the tibial tuberosity right there at the tendon. And that's via the quadriceps femoris tendon and the patellar ligament. All right. Which can also be referred to as. All right. So this episode, let's get into this. This episode of the NASM CPT Podcast is brought to you by NASM One, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations. Get access to free CEUs and more. All of this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM One. All right, let's talk about the vastus lateralis. Vastus, large, lateralis, lateral. So the large muscle on the outside, the lateral side of the thighs. Where does it start from? What is the origin or the proximal attachment? And so there are several listed things here outside of maybe just the CES, and that would be the intertrochanteric line. This is the line between the greater trochanter and the lesser trochanter. attaches to the greater trochanter, the gluteal tuberosity. So anytime you see a tuberosity, it's going to be a bony notch. And then the lateral lip of the linea aspera of the femur. Now, this one's interesting because the linea aspera is on the posterior side of the femur. So the vastus lateralis actually kind of starts on the posterior side of the femur and wraps around it. And it wraps around, it's on the side, and then it goes down into where? Well, its insertion is the tibial tuberosity, because that's where the quads all attach into, via the quadriceps femoris muscle, via the patellar ligament, and the lateral border of the patella. So let's look at the medius. Now, vastus medialis, the origin, is the intertrochanteric line of the medial to the spiral line of the linea aspera. Again, the linea aspera is that bony ridge on the posterior side of the femur, the backside, the posterior side of the femur, and then extends inferiorly to the medial supracondylar line. Now, the condyles of the femur are the bony extensions at the distal part of the femur. So if you think about it, the femur is kind of thin, and then as it gets down to the distal portion, it kind of mushrooms out a little bit on both sides. So those will be the condyles of the femur. But then that muscle, which has an origin or proximal attachment, which runs up and down the femur, it inserts into, guess what? The tibial tuberosity via the tendon of the quadriceps muscle and the patellar ligament. And it's the medial border of the patella that it goes down, not the lateral. And then finally, extends the knee, extends the knee, extends the knee. They all extend the knee. And then the vastus the vastus intermedius, which is proximal attachment on the anterior and lateral surfaces of the body of the femur. So it's on the femur, but it's on the front and a little bit on the lateral side of the femur. And then it goes to, guess what? Tibial tuberosity via the tendon of the quadriceps of the femur and the patellar ligament, or sometimes referred to as the patellar tendon. It extends the knee joint. But now I want to share with you a fun fact. And here's what I'll do. I'll give you a couple of resources that we're going to put in the link here. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about a fifth muscle in the quadricep. And yeah, sometimes you'll hear people refer to the VMO, which is a section of the vastus medialis, the VM, vastus medialis, obliquus, and then there's an oblique angle, and sometimes people refer to that to a fifth quadricep, but it's part of the vastus medialis, so it's arguable. I understand that, but a recent cadaveric study has identified a fifth muscle that contributes to the quadriceps femoris group. This so-called tensor vastus intermedius was identified between the vastus lateralis and the vastus intermedius in 22 of 26 cases. This muscle originates from the anterior-inferior aspect of the greater trochanter of the femur. Greater trochanter are those big bony notches on the side of the hips, what we'll refer to sometimes as the hip bones. That's the greater trochanter of the femur. And it's distal to the intertrochanteric line. So I've got the trochanters and it's intertrochanteric between the two trochanters. The muscle belly, like other muscles of the quadriceps, becomes aponeurotic distally, which means kind of tendinous as it gets in there. So, I guess that's the best way. Tendinous. And then let's say and inserts into the medial aspect of the base of the patella. It's hypothesized that the tensor vastus intermedius plays a role in controlling motion of the patella by counteracting the forces of the vastus medialis muscle, who also has an oblique pull on that. Additionally, the tensor vastus medialis may exert tension on the aponeurosis of the vastus intermedius. So that one's kind of interesting, but what we do not see is that muscle crossing the knee. So it's It may not fall into the quadriceps group because the quadriceps all go into the quadriceps tendon, yes, but then they also go into the patellar tendon and into the greater trochanter of the femur. So it seems like they join forces. They have a combined aponeurotic attachment, but it only attaches to the patella. Interesting story. Hope you can do something with that, maybe at anatomy trivia night at your school. Anyway, thanks for listening. And thank you to our producer, Eric Sorensen. Please like, subscribe, share, leave a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out like Jill W. did, hit me up. You can do so on Instagram at dr.rickrichey or email me rick.richey@nasm.org. Y'all keep inspiring people to fitness. Thanks for listening. This has been the NASM CPT Podcast.